This episode of Historians of the Movies podcast is brought to you by our new Patreon.com subscribers, Drew Harrell, Jeremy Ruby, and Bridget Donahue Farrell. If you would like to help support the podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians at the movies or shoot us an email at hatmpodcast@gmail.com. Now on to the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to Historians at the Movies podcast. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are talking about movies and the histories behind them. And this week, we're going to a place we've never been before. We're going to Antarctica. We're talking about 1982's The Thing. And for you this week, I brought on not only another historian, but two amazing scientists as well to talk not only about the history of human exploration into Antarctica, but also the science behind it. So I'm pleased and proud to introduce to you my friends Peter Neff, Matthew Siegfried, and Daniella McCahey. Peter Neff is a glaciologist in the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate at the University of Minnesota, where he studies the climate of coastal changing regions in western Antarctica. Matthew Siegfried is also a glaciologist, and he's right up the road here at the Denver School of Mines. He runs the Mines Glaciology Laboratory and uses satellite remote sensing techniques in combination with field-based and airborne geophysical methods to understand physical processes of Earth's glaciers and ice sheets. And finally, but certainly not least, is my friend Daniella McCahey. She's an assistant professor at Texas Tech University, where her research attempts to connect Antarctic geographies to greater world history. She has a book in progress that examines the United Kingdom's 1955 to 1958 Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Guys, today we are going to talk about the science in Antarctica. Who owns Antarctica? Have there ever been any feuds over there? We're going to talk about this 1982 film. We're also going to talk about the effect of climate change in Antarctica and whether or not there have ever been aliens there and who makes it out alive. Is it Childs or MacReady? We're going to find out. So stick around, sit back and relax, because The Thing is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. Guys, welcome. This is not quite Ice Station, whatever. Welcome to Colorado is what I'll say here. So this is our first time talking. Daniella, you and I have talked before. We've met each other in person, but you were saying that you put this whole thing together and haven't even known everybody. So the onus is on you, madam, to make sure that this is a good podcast. So
no pressure.
It better be, everyone.
Well, let's do some introductions. We'll get this thing going. Daniella, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Daniella McCahey. I'm an assistant professor at Texas Tech and in Lubbock, Texas. And I research the history of science and exploration in Antarctica.
Very nice. Matt, you were the second person on, so we'll have you go next, everybody.
I'm Matt Siegfried. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Geophysics at Colorado School of Mines, and I study ice processes and water systems beneath Antarctica.
That's going to come in handy today, I think, whenever we
It will.
In
fact, we're the closest thing to the thing that exists.
Dude, okay. Yeah, this is going to be fun. Peter, welcome to the pod, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Peter Neff. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. I'm an ice core scientist, glaciologist, paleoclimatologist, whatever ologist you like. If there's an Antarctic ice core project going on right now, there's a good chance that I'm a part of it or leading it. So we drill into the ice to learn about past climate history.
So Peter's the guy in The Thing who looks at the ice and says, yes, this is 100,000 years old.
Oh, okay. Well, very good. Peter, I did not do anything anywhere. I did my doctorate at Minnesota. So
okay.
I did not do anything anywhere near as cool as that. I, spent my entire time with my head in my books the whole time, just trying to get out of Minneapolis.
What's your degree in?
History. My specialization is in indigenous and environmental history, which serves me a lot well doing a movie podcast. But this road is long and winding, so that's how we ended up here. But Matt's up at. I was saying this before we logged on. Matt's just up the road here in Colorado. You're in Minneapolis, so I feel like we've got a lot of ties here to do this movie. I've never seen this movie before we watched this for this pod today.
Oh wow!
Oh my god!
Oh, so you just watched it today?
Well, no, I watched it a couple days ago, and I was tweeting. I was on Blue Sky because I've tried to limit my Twitter activity as much as I possibly can because I feel like I've got the ick whenever I tweet.
Yeah,
and so I spent all my time on Blue Sky. I was like, I'm watching this, going, Jesus Christ, this is top 20 movies for me now. Like, this is a phenomenal. This movie is so impossibly good,
and it was such a bomb. When it came out,
huge box office bomb.
Huge
no one liked
box office bomb
because it's like gross. It's gory, but it's like gross, And
it came out with E.T. And so you have like happy
two versions
E.T.
of aliens.
Alien, and the oil crisis was going on. I think happy E.T. Alien or nihilistic, insane John Carpenter movie. Which are you paying to see?
Well, and also Cold War. We got to think about Cold War, mutually assured destruction that we see with the sort of end of the film.
Well, I think we're going to ruin this talk later on because this movie has aged incredibly well, has it not?
Yes.
Like and that's a beautiful thing about Carpenter's using these practical effects, which unlike say Lucas using the digital stuff and the prequel stuff, this stuff it's still. I mean, it's from '82, right? But it still feels good when you watch it. The effects on this are just. Is this a horror movie? What kind of movie is this, guys? I mean, I don't really know how to characterize this film.
I thought it was a biopic.
Yeah, documentary, right?
I mean, I feel like it fits within a certain genre of, it's hard to categorize as, is this a horror movie? Is this like a thriller? It reminds me of like Alien, right? Which comes around the same time. And, where it's like, there are horror aspects to it and also sort of action thriller type aspects. You also see right around this time, I mean, I'm thinking of movies like The Shining, Poltergeist, these sort of like 80s movies that they're scary, but they're also psychological, right?
Yeah, it has its horror moments, but it's not really central necessarily, or it doesn't have to be to the film, which, I would say is more of a psychological thriller.
Yeah, like a suspense psychological thriller, I think, because I forgot, I watched it this week to prep. I did my homework. I forgot how slow it is, like how much it builds. And like, that's not horror style, right? Like that's psychological thriller style. And it's all about the paranoia developing slowly over the hour and a half or however long it is.
Well, and I wonder if there's something about the protagonist being an alien or the antagonist. I was rooting for the alien.
Really?
But, the antagonist being an alien as opposed to like, it kind of slots itself more as a sci-fi thriller, like in the terms of Alien, because it reminds me a much later movie that's also set in the Antarctic is Aliens versus Predators, which is deep under the ice. You also have that going on, right? So I think that the alien feature to it turns it into something that's science fiction rather than necessarily horror, if that makes sense.
You guys want to guess the last time and place that I watched the thing?
In Antarctica? In the winter?
It was in Antarctica. It wasn't in winter.
Coffee house?
No, on a South Korean icebreaker. Introducing our South Korean colleagues to the movie, we had to work really hard to find a subtitle file that would sync with the film. But I think in the end, we only educated one or two people. They, might have been a little bit much.
Did you write that into your broader impacts of your grant?
No.
Do you even need language in this film? We talk about how slow this movie is and how much it builds and things like that. It's really, you could probably do this movie without any language whatsoever, without any spoken words, at least not knowing what it was. You could watch this movie if you're from, say, South Korea, watch it in English, not speaking English, and probably get a sense of what's going on in this movie. Could you not?
Oh, I think so, yeah.
I mean, maybe. I could give you a fun fact about language in this movie that is widely known. You guys, I'm sure Matt and Peter already know it, but it's that, in the beginning, the Norwegian guy coming up or whatever. I mean, first of all, probably the most far-fetched thing about this movie is that a Norwegian didn't speak perfect English. But
right?
It's that he's actually revealing the plot of the movie in Norwegian. And so if you speak Norwegian, the movie is already revealed in the first minute that it's it's a thing that can imitate other things.
Well, isn't that what you would say if you were trying to kill this thing? And maybe you've got some person from Minnesota whose grandfather was Sven Oleg Vaktarsson, at the center, and maybe he also speaks Norwegian. So maybe, I mean, of course you're going to be saying that, right? I mean, before you take a chamber to the eye, as you're chasing this thing. Before we get into this film, before we jump in too hard, I want to talk about Antarctica, because Danielle and I, for you guys coming in, HATM, we've been doing movies on every Sunday night for the last 6 years, where we do a live watch party on, formerly it was Twitter, and now it's on Blue Sky and things like that. We've been trying so hard to find films in which we could really collaborate and do, but there's just, aside from The Thing or Aliens, we're not doing Aliens versus Predator fucking ever on this pod. We'll do Alien. We've done Aliens and we've done Predator, but we will not do such a bad film. But we've been searching for something set in Antarctica. We just can't find it, right? And it's just.
Are you serious?
You don't want to do
what do you got?
Eight Below? Come on.
Paul Walker. I can actually give you a list. The issue has been is there's not stuff that's on normal streaming platforms.
Okay.
Because there
What's
are
the list?
Definitely things. Oh, I mean, we can.
8 Below. End of list.
Wait, is that the one with Paul Walker?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
that's why he died.
I couldn't make it 5 minutes into that movie.
No, there's one about those Japanese dogs that got abandoned there, though, too. There's
Eight Below is an adaptation.
That's definitely our audience.
Adaptation, right? It's an adaptation.
Right, okay.
And then, The Pebble and the Penguin, classic. Happy Feet, which has a really heavy-handed environmental impact message.
Penguin Twitter is really big this day. I'm sure we'll bring a lot of audience in from that one. Go on.
Scott of the Antarctic.
Yeah.
There was this is a mini series that's a bio of Shackleton. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? I don't know. I could keep rattling some more off.
I think you're just making up
Matt,
movies.
Sorry.
Have you heard of The Lake at the Bottom of the World?
I have not.
Documentaries don't count. Come on.
Documentaries don't count. That's
what's the penguin surfing movie that I actually like? Because that starts in Antarctica.
That's Happy Feet, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Oh,
Happy Feet.
It's one of the Madagascar penguin films. I've
seen it. It's a little bit. What is it?
You forgot about Day After Tomorrow. That starts in Antarctica.
Oh, okay. Well, World War Z also has a scene in Antarctica, doesn't it? Or in the book it does. In the
Dennis
book it does.
Quaid, Ice Core geochemist.
God, it's been so long since I saw that.
Yeah, there's a rift in the ice shelf, and he jumps over it at the beginning.
Yeah,
surfs up.
There's not enough.
I know.
Well, the penguin one is Penguins of Madagascar, right?
It surfs up.
I've watched it recently with my daughter. It starts with the great Werner Herzog character introducing the penguins.
See, Werner Herzog is it's a thing I can do, and I can do a pretty good Werner Herzog impression, but I have to listen to him immediately before I do it. I can't just get there.
So have you seen his Antarctic movie?
No,
that's a documentary again.
I got turned off after watching Grizzly Man.
Yeah.
That's just like, I can't let you watch. It's it's so bad. It's like
you gotta watch his older movies are better.
He's so great. I love him. Was he the one? Didn't he also do that Vietnam War film with Christian Bale?
Yeah.
Was it based on I forget the name of it, but whatever. It's
Encounters at the End of the World is the documentary. Mm-hmm. But that's that was pretty. I mean, and that came out only a couple years after March of Penguins, which obviously another documentary. But that had such popular appeal that it's almost regular people saw that. I saw that when I was a kid.
Are you saying we're not regular people?
Well, but there's still no professors. Antarctic film that is tied to international human culture like The Thing, which is annoying to me.
Right. This movie actually does a lot, does it not? I mean,
if
we're
you
going to break this down.
Any of my comments on social media just have a string of comments about dogs and flamethrowers, and I do admit I play into it, and I make sure that people know we're issued flamethrowers when we go down there.
This is why they ban dogs in Antarctica, right?
No.
The
timing is suspicious.
The timing
actually
would check out, right?
It would.
Yeah.
But are we not allowed to have dogs in Antarctica?
Not
Yeah.
since the Madrid Protocol.
For the seals, protecting the seals from distemper.
Wow. Okay. All right. So there's so much here.
Mostly the dogs at that point, by that time, had only really served psychological purposes rather than because once you had the skidoos, that kind of replaced their use for like travel and stuff. So it was more of like, psychological having a dog.
Isn't National Treasure the opening scene set when they find the ship, the Charlotte?
That's the Arctic.
It's the Arctic.
It's the Arctic. Okay.
That's the Arctic.
That's
close.
But Fast X, they do go to Antarctica.
Okay, with the submarine.
I
don't even know.
There's a lot of books where people go to Antarctica. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, they go to Antarctica.
No one cares about books, Daniela.
Oh, God.
That's the historian spirit, if I've ever heard it.
Exactly, right? I'm going to ask you guys, actually, let's talk about a brief history of Antarctica, if we will. I want to kind of go back to this idea of what the Antarctic is, because I think for a lot of people, you guys are specialists in this place, but it still feels like it's this great unknown. I think people know about Antarctica, but don't really know anything about the place itself. So my first question is, where is it actually, and has it always been there? And I'm thinking about Pangea, and how does the Antarctic come to be Antarctica to begin with?
Who's going to take this?
You're the paleo person. I'm not talking about Gondwana land.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to say that the Antarctic ice sheet has been around for the last 34 million years or something like that, and that implies that it was in the relatively south polar position at that time. So somewhere between 60 and 40 million years ago, you had Antarctica as a continent isolate itself surrounded by a southern ocean, and that really is a major sort of shift in climate to have that circumpolar southern ocean, and then sort of locks in the structures that still support the ice sheet there today, the continental structure. That's my rusty geologist explanation. I used to be a geologist. Now I'm just an ice nerd.
Yeah, I can dig a little deeper into that. Go for it. You had a supercontinent, Gondwana, so it's like Pangea, just more recent. And so Antarctica was, I think, if I remember my geology correctly, between Australia, it was connected to Australia, South America, Africa, and then all of those continents start to move north. And Gondwana was in the southern hemisphere, so Antarctica didn't actually need to move all that much. It shifted a little bit further south, but so those all start separating. The Tasmanian Sea opens up, so Australia disconnects. Then the last thing to go is South America, and so you open up Drake Passage, and that allows Antarctica to get isolated down there. So you have this big circumpolar current and wind, and so Antarctica just keeps getting colder and colder as it gets disconnected from the rest of the world, and that's what really allows this ice sheet to pop up 34 million years ago.
Here, I have a fun thing to show. Look, this is from the proceedings from the first conference in Antarctic geology from 1963 in South Africa. Nice. And it's the opening of it is kind of hilarious because it's South Africa just has become a republic. And they're kind of like, look how not racist we are in South Africa. But also one thing that's very interesting in terms of Gondwana, when this came out, Matt and Peter, you guys should appreciate it. In 63, it's before there's widespread acceptance of continental drift. And in fact, there's only 2 geologists in this whole text that are writing in favor of continental drift. And a couple that are vehemently against. Most people, it mostly just doesn't come up. But in 60, and then within another 10 years, pretty much everyone's on board with it. But it's not until, I think, 63 that Tuzo Wilson has his article on hotspots. It's like, this is a very recent explanation that we have for where Antarctica is and why.
Well, and Antarctica plays into the sort of locking in the theory of continental drift.
Yeah,
with
very
finding fern fossils, Glossopteris. Matt's going to pump the brakes.
Point of order. As a pedantic geophysicist, I have to say we don't believe in continental drift. There are technical geophysics reasons. This is plate tectonics, not continental drift. But since we brought up continental drift, great fact, the guy who developed that, Alfred Wegener, died in Greenland exploring ice sheets.
Yeah, well, I mean, and then in terms of Antarctica and the evidence, you have the biogeographical evidence that was first brought back from by Scott's expedition. But in this book, it's actually from the Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic Expedition that a woman geologist, Edna Plumstead, got the specimens from the expedition that crossed in the 50s and is using those specimens to make the argument and push it forward. But it's not, there are some people who would argue that it's not the biogeographical evidence that ends up being convincing. It's the seafloor spreading and the paleomagnetic observations. I think there's
So back to this: how long has Antarctica been around? I'll give you my etymological argument that it's only 34 million years. And that's from the word itself, Antarctica, which means the opposite of Arctic. And Arctic comes from Arctos, which is bear. And so it means not bear, right? And so when it's connected as part of a supercontinent to Australia, where there are koala bears, and Africa and South America, where bears are all allowed, right? It's not Antarctica. It needs to be separated from that. And the bears need to disappear for this to become Antarctica.
Okay, but, of course, the other etymological explanation is it's no bear because of Ursa Major or whatever that's in the north, right? And in the south is no bear.
Yeah. Either way, still a primary reason I love doing research in Antarctica is that there are no bears. Really a huge motivation.
You don't get issued guns like they do in the Arctic.
Yeah, I live in Colorado, and as does Matt, and I can go around out here because we have like black bears and they're fine.
Yeah.
Grizzly bears scare the holy living shit out of me, and I can't begin to imagine what a fucking polar bear would do to me. So
yeah, the first place I ever went and did field work was the summit camp in the summit of the Greenland ice sheet, and we used to camp out in tents there back in 2007. But a bear turned up in 2018, and again this last summer. So nobody sleeps in tents up on the summit of the Greenland ice sheet anymore, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's a hard pass for me, man. Bears. Yeah. We have mountain lions out here too. They call them cats out here in Colorado, and they're also terrifying because they're so quiet. A bear, you kind of know when it's around, and I know this, from my time in Florida where we've got tons and tons of bears down there as well. Mountain lions scare me, and things that can kill and eat me scare me. So there's a lot of that in this film too. So I guess that's great. Peter, what is Antarctica made of? Like it's so hard to envision this because you're driving around either Minnesota or in Texas, which is, I don't even know what those people are made of, but what's a composition? It's not just ice, it's a continent, right? But is it rock? What is it?
It's got all of the above. Being a continent, that's, the area of the lower 48 US states with room for Mexico. It's got any type of geology underneath. It's got it. It's, a on average 1.5 mile thick pile of snow that, compresses into ice once you have about 150 meter thick pile of snow that never melts. But it's up to, beyond 2 miles thick at the thickest places. So 4,000 meters in the units we'd actually used in science. Yeah, it's a lot more diverse than you often would think looking at it from a satellite image of just all white. There are warm parts of Antarctica, super cold parts. Yes, on average, it is the highest, driest, coldest, windiest continent, but mostly you're talking about East Antarctica when you talk about that. And Matt and I do a lot of work in West Antarctica, which is lower elevation, but we call it a marine ice sheet for some of the ways that it behaves and interacts with the ocean and has its base grounded on bedrock below sea level, but it also climatologically is sort of a marine climate, which is really important as well. And it certainly Antarctica can look not a lot different from Minnesota and the plains in wintertime, but also We do, and Matt does as well, interact with the material that's beneath the ice. And we're now increasingly on the ice core drilling side of things, drilling in places where we are on the margin of the ice sheet, near rocks. And that's where we're actually finding little trapped pockets of some of the oldest preserved ice on the planet, up to like 6 million years old now, for samples from just the last season we were down there.
What do you use to tell the age of ice? How does this work?
Well, the best ways we like are annual dating, counting annual layers going back from the surface in a traditional vertical deep ice core drilling sense. But these oldest ice pockets are really out of order. They're pretty sketchy, to be honest. They take a lot of work to interpret. But dating them, you can date the argon isotopes in the air bubbles in the ice. And argon is, argon 40 is constantly accumulating in the atmosphere as Earth's crust off gases. Some clever folks discovered that. Actually, just learned last week that argon 40 was first discovered here at the University of Minnesota, and a lot of early mass spectrometry to do that was developed here. So pretty cool, super detailed geochemical tools we have to, chronometers, if you want to say that, to get pretty good ages on the ice.
You had mentioned earlier that that Antarctica breaks away from Australia, and there's a whole diatribe of bears that people would listen to about 4 minutes ago, or lack thereof. But I'm wondering, fossils we're finding in Antarctica as well. This is not a place I tend to think about as like fossil beds, but what do we find there when people are able to find fossils there? Where are these fossils at, and what are people finding there?
Yeah, if you go to the geologic provinces that are sedimentary as opposed to volcanic or plutonic, different types of areas, it actually does tend to dictate where a lot of science happens, because these paleontologists have charismatic dinosaur fossils that they find that are compelling to the folks who fund research. But so like north of McMurdo Station is where you'd find dinosaur fossils. Victoria Land is a spot.
Shit.
And there's a range of fossils and where rock outcrops in sort of the McMurdo Sound area, but
south as well. Jacqueline Camp, they found a whole bunch of Carboniferous dinosaur fossils. They also find a lot of these fossils off the Antarctic Peninsula on the subpolar islands over there, subantarctic islands.
I mean, but there's a lot more like rocks to play around with on the peninsula, because the peninsula is a lot more temperate. For the British stations, for example, the only station where you can even see the aurora is the Halley Bay station, because the rest are so much more north. But the first kind of big carnivore that was discovered in Antarctica was 1990, and that was William Hammer at Augustana College, the Cryoloptosaurus, which I think
this is still recent, fairly recent, right? I mean, I think of 1990 as recent, in my own Gen X head.
I mean, Sue was also 1990, so
the T-Rex,
the T-Rex, that was also 90
up in Chicago. Okay, all right, fair enough. Danielle, I want to ask you this: how long do people know about Antarctica? Like, when does Antarctica begin to enter into the historical record? When do people start to find this place?
So Antarctica is kind of this fascinating thing because, what are we counting as like discovery and knowledge?
Sure.
Because like the idea of Antarctica can kind of be traced back to like, as far as like Parmenides and like the division of the earth into different sort of zones. So we have this kind of like frigid zone at the top. So there's going to be sort of one at the bottom. And in maps in the early modern period in particular, it's like really striking. What you have is this kind of idea of an imagined Antarctica. They call it Terra Australia Incognito. Terra Australis Incognito. So this hidden southern land they assume there's got to be land down there, but they are like, we just haven't found it yet, And so you see tons of early modern maps that have sometimes a massive Antarctica, a massive land at the bottom of the world, but it just hadn't yet been discovered. It starts to creep off the maps during the 18th century Enlightenment, because people are like, well, we haven't found it yet, so maybe it's not there. And an expedition, it's often considered to mark the beginning of Antarctic exploration is Cook's expedition, right? Although there's a Maori oral tradition about Polynesian explorers that went as far south as the Ross Sea during the 7th century. But the documented finding of Antarctica is kind of often dated to the Cook expedition. Cook, something I find really fascinating is there was this guy, a hydrographer at the Royal Society, who was one of those people who was convinced that there must be a continent. We just haven't found it yet. And his name was Alexander Dalrymple. And he wrote this treatise where he lays out all the reasons why he thinks there's a massive southern continent and why the British should be the ones to go and find it. And some of the reasons include these really fascinating things like there's probably about 50 million people there, considering how big I think it is. And so we can trade with them. And
they're very hairy.
Well, and this is great.
It was just penguins.
Because it'll solve our problem that we're currently having with the American colonists, because we won't be so dependent on them for trade, because this was in the 1760s. He writes this, and then Cook goes down there 72, 73. And Cook doesn't find it. And he's basically like, there might be land down there, but it's so horrible down here. I don't envy anyone the like glory of finding any land. It's in 1820, because slowly you have different subantarctic islands being discovered. Cook discovers South Georgia, South Shetland, stuff like that. But it's 1820 that 3 different countries kind of claim that they have a discoverer of Antarctica.
Within a week. They all discover it within a week.
Well, 2 of them are within a week. One's like 6 months later. The American is like later.
Yeah.
But 2 guys within a week. The British Edward Bransfield was a Royal Naval officer, and then Fabian von Bellinghausen for the Russian Imperial Navy, and then you get to Nathaniel Palmer, the American, in November. But what's crazy is the thing is then it's like, well, what counts as discovery? Because some people will say, well, Bellinghausen didn't really discover it because he didn't know what he was looking at. And ergo, since he didn't know, and so that's why these 3 different countries still dispute who was the actual founder, even though we have a pretty good sense of the dates. It's just, did they know what they were looking at? And was it actually the continent, or was it the islands, or, So 1820 is the short answer to your long question.
All right, fair enough. We open up this film, and I think one of the other things is that Antarctica feels in some ways like the moon or Mars to me, in the ways that we look at this. It's just, you guys have all been there at the research stations and things like that. We open up to that research station with the Norwegians trying to kill the dog.
In winter 1982, in the broad daylight.
Yeah, like
sorry, we all scientists sometimes have a problem suspending disbelief.
Well, to tell me this, who owns Antarctica? Like, how does this work? Because there are all these stations, as I understand it, right, Peter? Like, these different countries have their own stations and things like that. There's a loose affiliation. Everyone just kind of has their spot. How does this work? Who owns what? Or does anyone own the land? How does all of this work over there now?
Well, we've all agreed to disagree, I think, is what the Antarctic Treaty System sort of freezes in place.
Lovely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Antarctic Treaty System came to be in the middle 20th century, sort of in response to early, even hot little conflicts, little kerfuffles on the Antarctic Peninsula between Chileans and Argentinians and British, and there were machine guns involved. So over the I don't know what period of time. I'm sure Daniella could tell us. Folks are making territorial claims. So there are some nations that claim territory, some that reserve the right to, like the U.S. and Russia. So Australia obviously claims a huge amount of territory. Mm-hmm. Like basically everywhere south of Australia is their territory. But we've all agreed just to, I think, literally freeze anybody's claims is how it's worded in the treaty.
Article 4. It's that no one will take any steps. No one's surrendering their claim. The 7 Antarctic countries, none of them are surrendering it, but that they will not take steps to enforce it. So that goes into effect in 1961, which is a pretty remarkable time to have these big players, including the USSR, involved in a treaty like that. So it has been a pretty impactful agreement through time. It was the first nuclear treaty of the Cold War. Yeah, first non-nuclear proliferation treaty.
Yep. No shit.
1959, they all signed it.
And then it went into effect a couple years later, yeah.
There are 7 countries?
7, of signers of the treaty, there were 13, but 7 countries that make claims. There are 7 countries that have claims. So the claimant states are Argentina, Chile, Great Britain, France, Norway, New Zealand, and Australia.
And so it starts with 12 parties, I think, 12?
Or is it 12? It's 12. You're
12.
right. I'm sorry.
It's up to almost 60 parties. The most recent signatory to the treaty is actually Costa Rica, which is a personal story because it was a guy on 2 of my field teams, Marino Prati, who was inspired to join the Antarctic Treaty after John Kerry came down in 2016. Just after the 2016 election, John Kerry, Secretary of State, comes down, does the dog and pony show at McMurdo Station, gives a speech, which was actually really incredible to see a speech from John Kerry right after the 2016 election. It was personally inspiring. And this guy on my field team, Marino Prati, he's a seismologist from Costa Rica, amazing dude, and huge pacifist. And he loves the Antarctic Treaty. And so he raises his hand during the question and answer session. I have a picture of this. And he asked John Kerry point blank, what is the U.S. doing to ensure the treaty gets renewed when it comes up in the late 2040s? And John Kerry kind of brushed him off and was like, well, that's far away. Like, we have more important things to do. And we get put into our field site, which is 500 miles away in the middle of West Antarctica, 6 of us. And he spends the next 6 weeks with the 6 of us just enraged at the situation. He's like, I cannot believe they're not taking this seriously. Like, we need to do something about it. I'm going to go home and have Costa Rica join the treaty. He said that. And we were all like, sure, whatever. And 2022 comes around, and wouldn't you know it, Costa Rica joins the treaty. And he worked for years to get Costa Rica as a signatory because he wanted his country to have a say about this last landmass and keeping it peaceful, keeping it for science, and all the great things that the treaty provides. He wanted to make sure it survives into the future.
I kind of love that, man. That's
what an
incredible human. Sorry for that entire tangent, but the treaty is like terrific. This really special thing that governs Antarctica unlike any other place on Earth. Other than outer space, which is not on Earth.
Well, but the Outer Space Treaty was only a few years later and inspired by the Antarctic Treaty. And I think the reason it's so phenomenal or so interesting anyway. I try and hesitate using the words exceptional to Antarctica because a lot of my work is trying to show that it's not exceptional. But the Antarctic Treaty is interesting because it's coming at the height, if we want to say the height of the Cold War, right? This this non-nuclear proliferation treaty where everyone agrees that this piece of land should be kept for peaceful reasons with scientific cooperation as a major feature on one hand, but it's also right at this moment of decolonization, right? Where all of these empires like France and Great Britain and stuff are trying to figure out how do they keep continuing to have an influence while simultaneously like playing lip service to like, oh yeah, no, we're totally fine with decolonization. Like that's cool, with us. And the Antarctic Treaty actually allows them to not ever have to have it out seriously with Argentina or Chile. I mean, you could argue the Falklands crisis, because there was a battle of Falkland Islands fought at South Georgia, for instance. But so it is this really interesting geopolitical moment with both the Cold War and decolonization kind of going on.
Let me ask you this. How do you get to Antarctica? What's the process?
Oh, it depends who you are.
If you're John Kerry, you got a flight when you need one.
That right?
If you're one of the majority of people who go, which is as a tourist, you go down to Ushuaia or maybe Punta Arenas. There's a few other places, but the vast majority is Ushuaia. And you get on a cruise ship that takes you down to the Antarctic Peninsula. So the vast majority of people who go to Antarctica, that's how they go. But I've never been to Antarctica, so I'll let you guys answer how you've been.
Tourists can also fly down. They restarted the Circle flight, so they fly down from Hobart.
Qantas has one.
Yeah, they fly down on a jumbo jet. They do a little circle over in Antarctica. You hope that there are no clouds and whatever, and then you fly right home.
And in case, Jason, so you don't, because you might not know, though the three of us do, is the hoping no clouds thing is important because in 79 when an Air New Zealand flight flew into Mount Erebus and killed everyone on board on one of these circle flights. And Edmund Hillary was actually supposed to be on that flight. One of his friends who was on the Trans-Antarctic crossing was on instead. And it's the biggest disaster in New Zealand history, let alone Antarctic history.
Yeah, I have to tell you guys, this idea of the elevation, I had completely, this is going to reveal my utter ignorance about Antarctica, hadn't even thought about the elevation and the idea that there are mountains and like tall places. How tall are we talking in Antarctica? Like how high do we get?
Just over, 11,000, 12,000 feet at the summit of the East Antarctic ice sheet. We have a team
so the
highest
point in Antarctica is 16,000 feet, Mount Vinson Massif.
Sure.
And it's a big climbing destination for the people who want to do the 7 summits. So there's yet another tourist option is to pay a lot of money to fly down to the one private camp run by Antarctic Logistics Explorations, ALE. I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
Expedition.
And so climbers will go down, or the 7 marathons, like 7 marathons in 7 continents in 7 days. Those sorts of like really expensive tourist stuff you can do as well.
Yeah, there's a few other.
You guys get down there though.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I would say like from the tourist perspective, like there are echelons of that of flying down as the uber rich, and then ships which are a little bit more accessible to not exorbitantly wealthy people, just wealthy people. And then I would say most other countries have a key infrastructure asset of a polar icebreaker that gets their people to their stations, either from Australia, South Africa, or South America. And then us, from the States, if you're deploying with the U.S. government, the U.S. National Science Foundation, they coordinate with the Air Force to fly us from Christchurch, New Zealand, which is where the Navy originally started the first flights from outside of Antarctica to Antarctica. It was from originally I think an Air Force base there, now the Christchurch airport. And so then we hop on military transport planes, either LC-130s, which are sort of Vietnam era turboprop planes, actually special made with skis on them to resupply distant early warning stations across the Arctic in defense from the USSR. And we're still flying those today. That's the slow boat to Antarctica, 8 or 9 hours. And if you're lucky, you get on a large transport jet aircraft, C-17s, that'll take you down there in 5 or 6 hours, unless you get all the way in Boomerang and something breaks on the airplane, like a toilet, and in which case you'll fly all the way back to New Zealand to fix things.
Or more reasonably, weather moves in, right? Yeah. We have pretty poor weather predictions. So, you're talking about a 10 or minimum 5 hour flight, maximum kind of 10, 11 hour flight. You take off from Christchurch, weather moves in, there's this point of southerly return, PSR. And if there's any question about whether or not you can land, you turn right back around. And so if you're on one of these LC-130s, one of these turboprop planes with skis, you're talking about an 18-hour flight to land right back at Christchurch. And there are, of course, horror stories of people we know that have done like 3 of these flights in 3 days. So imagine getting up at 3 a.m., heading to the Christchurch airport, the Antarctic terminal at the Christchurch airport, getting on one of these planes. The seats are cargo nets, right? This is not comfortable.
Yeah.
And it's loud, right? Turboprop plane. You're on it for 18 hours. You land back there at midnight. You take a shuttle to your hotel. You sleep for half an hour. You go right back to the airport and do it all over again the next day.
Yeah.
Do we think the thing was just angry because it landed in Antarctica and it was like, fuck me, I am not ever getting out of here? I mean, because Jesus Christ, to get from Minnesota down to Christchurch and then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So folks, our teams who are deploying this season, they leave home 5 days before their flight to Antarctica. So you start moving. You also lose a day in transit because you're flying backwards across the international date line to New Zealand. But it's quite an ordeal.
If there's a weather system, right? You sit in Christchurch. I've done 3-4 weeks in Christchurch before, just waiting.
Are you serious?
Don't get it started if there's a pandemic as well, or a COVID outbreak in Antarctica. I've also, no complaints, enjoyed a 2-week vacation in New Zealand in a hotel.
Christchurch is very nice.
Yeah,
it sounds great, but it's actually not, because they almost never full on cancel your flight the day before. It's always like, wake up, see what the status of the flight is, because it's usually weather, or they think they can fix the plane overnight and they can't. And so you're waking up every day and they're like, nope, canceled again. Most days you actually transport and then get canceled at the airport. The good days are when they tell you before you leave the hotel.
Just last week, I think there was a good outcome. The C-17 started flying south. 2 hours in, it hit a bird and had to fly back to Christchurch just to check it out. And then they actually went again the same day. They didn't even deplane. So that's a lucky outcome.
There was one year where the cart, the little vehicle that loads the bags onto the plane, accidentally hit the loading ramp, and the plane was out of commission for 4 days.
Yeah. We could go on forever.
I can take it back to something political about these flights and say who the ice breaking thing, who owns icebreakers and stuff is actually a major geopolitical strategic question. Because, for instance, the British have gone back and forth many times over the years on should we have, because how embarrassing is it going to be for us if we have to get rescued by the Chilean or Argentinian Navy, something that has happened before. You have cases where like South Africa has an icebreaker there, Gulas, which is the ship that found the Endurance a few years ago. It spends most of its time arguably, South Africa doesn't need an icebreaker. They spend most of their time in subantarctic, it's like Prince Edward Island and Gough Island and stuff. It's not the Antarctic. France just, even though they have an Antarctic claim, right, a daily land and stuff, they just announced last November that they're going to buy an icebreaker, that they're going to make one, and that'll be their first one. So these questions of how do you get there and stuff, sometimes who has the infrastructure to have an icebreaker is not always totally obvious and is very much a political question. In the 50s, people wrote to Prince Philip being like, it's unacceptable that we don't have one. And we're going to be embarrassed,
Huge geopolitical subtext to all of what we do in Antarctica. We're very lucky with the U.S. program to have, really exceptionally experienced military infrastructure that can, get these planes back and forth safely with an incredible safety record. There has been a pretty crazy record of aircraft incidents in Antarctica, and other nations more recently have had horrific, disasters trying to get across, even from South America to some of the stations, losing 48 people, I think, on a Chilean aircraft. So we're really lucky that we have a very safe air link. Every once in a while, a plane does make it past the point of safe return without enough fuel to go back and has to land in a whiteout. And that is terrifying for folks. I've had friends on those flights on the New Zealand Air Force's only plane. It's a crazy operation. For reference, the squadron of C-17s that fly us down in sort of early and late season, they're the same squadron that evacuated Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, at the beginning of that pullout. The exact same aircraft, the exact same crews. So we benefit and we are funded and have all this support because defense readiness is a big priority, and can fit into the peaceful structure of the treaty system.
Back to the question, though. So if I were an alien and I was going to crash land somewhere on Earth, I would absolutely, without a question, go to Antarctica. It is easily the safest place to crash land because it's basically just a flat ice sheet. So most of the continent, you can crash land somewhat safely. And so
it's literally the flattest spot besides the ocean, right?
Yeah. And so Peter and I both know people who have been in plane crashes in Antarctica. I know one guy that's been in 2 plane crashes and has survived because you can bail out in ways that you survive. There are also plane crashes, obviously, when you run into the side of a mountain, no one's surviving that.
Oh God, let's touch wood here.
Yeah, right.
These same aircraft are starting to fly to Antarctica right now.
You're going to crash land from space, go to Antarctica. The meteorites do it too, right? Tons of meteorites in Antarctica.
Well, I wonder, guys, Matt, Peter, you've both been down there. Is that a deterrent for you? The danger of getting down there? Is that ever kind of factored in your head? I don't want to have to go through this process of getting down there, but that's where my research is. Does it ever kind of get in the back of your head at all when you think about it?
More dangerous to get in my car in the morning in Colorado.
Antarctica has very low mortality rates.
To be fair, like Matt and I both drive in Colorado on a regular basis. This fucking place sucks.
Yeah.
This is the worst. And I've driven through Miami. Florida is home to me. And Colorado, why do they get right in your quarter panel here? They are the worst drivers I've ever encountered in the state.
Yeah, I mean, I drove.
This morning, I yelled at a Tesla who was. There was a lane was ending on the left lane was ending on the highway, and a Tesla from the lane to the right, 2 lanes right, moved into the lane that the left lane was merging into. Like the very most dangerous thing you could do, Tesla.
Yeah, I mean, I drove from Minnesota to Maine this summer, which is far more dangerous than by the odds than what we're doing in Antarctica. But it's still, I mean, it definitely creeps in for me. I mean, having been around when small aircraft crash and people die, and just this last season, I was coordinating, I think, 30 helicopter flights off of an icebreaker over water and ice, like a week from any emergency response. And a professor dad off the couch, was the one coordinating and slinging loads on these helicopters and, spanning language barriers. Like, it does get a little bit hairy.
Well, for other reasons, though, if I were an alien, I would crash land in Antarctica, though, because I know that Jason hates books, but H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds, right? The aliens eventually get killed by the common cold. Antarctica is one of the most germ-free. It's not totally germ-free. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon did an article in Environmental Humanities about this recently, but it's one of the safest in terms of getting a weird disease that's going to wipe me out as a species in Antarctica than other places. And
that's because of what? Few people, but also another, in addition to there not being bears, there are not mosquitoes, which is so amazing. No insects.
And there's just not animals in general, like other than at the coast where you have the sort of charismatic megafauna and, I mean, you have the stuff in the ocean, but once you get a couple miles inland, there's no animals either. So
great place to crash land.
There's something else we don't see actually in this film, Daniela, and that's women.
Huh.
Can we talk about the gender, like what's going on here in Antarctica, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I rewatched it last week as well. And right. I was thinking, notably, because apparently there is a prequel, which I haven't seen, that does have women in it because it's like a pretty recent movie. But by 1982, you have women at American Antarctic stations. And that's not true everywhere. Like the British don't fully integrate until 1996, for example. But you have women. But I think that the gender nature of this particular film makes it kind of fun as a horror, as a thriller type movie, because you don't have like the woman to be a victim kind of thing. The other thing about this is, so this is a thing, a monster or whatever, that can imitate you perfectly, right? And but like theoretically, if these guys knew each other, they'd be able to. One thing you never see when they're trying to like determine are they like who they say they are, they don't ask them personal questions. They're just like, do you swear? And it's like that the sort of idea that the men have to be like tough and isolated and not like intimate with each other, like fear of intimacy is actually what's killing them, because if they knew anything about each other, they'd be able to, not be tricked by this alien. I don't know, Matt.
So I think that that's actually quite representative of a project in Antarctica, because a lot of these are like scientific collaborations with people you don't know. Like I have gone down with people I've never met before almost every year I've gone down. And you're just kind of throwing these people out into an isolated system and hoping it works.
But I mean, if they're wintering over, although I guess it says that they're only like 2 weeks into winter or whatever, but if they're wintering over, they are spending a lot of time together. Like,
it seems like
instead he's just getting drunk and playing chess with a computer instead of with one of the other guys, right?
That's foreshadowing, though.
I think Kurt Russell's character is like the most on point Antarctic helicopter pilot I could imagine in a movie. Like he is perfect.
I endorse that.
And what's back to this aging well, like I was laughing when I was watching it because I was looking at these guys. I was like, we look exactly the same. The dudes at least look exactly the same down there right now.
Yeah, I wish we could share photos of this. I can think of a camp manager we had 2 years ago who looks like, most of the way to MacReady. short
Jonathan?
December. Yeah.
Looks just like Jonathan.
I want to ask you about somebody else. Speaking of the way people look, Wilford Brimley, no mustache.
No mustache, right?
Oh, yeah.
The most surprising part of the movie.
Yeah, a couple of different things. First of all, Brimley carries a lot of this film, which I was surprised to see. This was my very first time watching it, and I was surprised. I didn't know Brimley was in the movie, and I was surprised to see what a role he had in the film. And I kept wondering if did he already have diabetes, and then secondly, is his character a hero in the film? Because he's trying to destroy everything. There's that great scene where he's like, Earth has 27,000 hours, and then he just flips. So,
can I tell you a secret?
Please.
This is the film that launched him.
Really?
This was the first thing I had ever seen him in. Like, I know him from this movie.
So he was not a famous actor before this, and he was cast. If you go and read about the movie, I'm a big Wilford Brimley fan.
I was gonna say, are you just the Thing scholar, or is it?
No, Wilford Brimley scholar. I mean, mustache. Come on.
I know Matt fairly well, but I'm surprised. I'm learning things.
He was cast because for this big role that this character plays, they didn't want to put someone that had any baggage from past movies, like someone people would recognize.
Sure.
And so they hire Wilford Brimley pre-mustache, right? And the rest is history.
He's actually really good in this film. And of course, the big thing is the way he looks in Cocoon, just a couple, 3 years later. I always found, you guys ever watched The Firm?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Terrorizing that film.
He's like the bad guy who...
He's the security guy.
Yeah, kills everyone.
And he's got the letters when he's giving to Tom Cruise. It's like, it'd break your heart, wouldn't it? And I was like, man, I just want to eat some oats, Wilford. You're killing me here.
I mean, whether or not he's the hero or not is an open question, though, because I feel like it ends by revealing pretty convincingly that he is an alien, right? Like he's built the spaceship down there or whatever. He escapes and builds a little spaceship, but he destroys everything first.
Does he destroy anything as a human, or does he get turned
I think
later?
It's an open question. I don't know. It's not made. I don't think the movie makes it clear. So is he destroying everything to speed up the time that he can get himself out or whatever, or is he destroying everything to protect humanity? I don't know.
I hadn't thought about that. I just assumed the thing got to him in the shed, and that's when he turns.
I think it's. I personally think it's unclear. Let's speaking of great actors from that movie, let's talk about that dog, because that dog that brings the sort of that is the monster or whatever. It's so trippy and creepy how the dog acts like a human, it acts like someone who is scoping out, like it's going from room to room and looking in and being it's eavesdropping on conversations. For me, the trippy thing is there's something off with the dog, but you can't really quite define what it is. It's not going crazy or whatever, but it is acting in a way that we can recognize the intelligence of it. And then, then it is, sort of very surprising when it transforms like that. But the dog, I think, does a lot of heavy lifting for making this movie scary.
I don't know. I was sitting here thinking the guy running the operating system is called Windows. And I was like, what is this? Are there parts of this film, guys, that really speak to you, that you absolutely love? You all jumped in on this film the second, I've never heard of Jason Herbert. Let's talk about this movie.
I think the sets are really incredible, and the representation of a research station of that era is incredibly accurate. And I really wish there were a documentary about how they made this movie. And maybe I'm missing that there is one, but I want to focus exactly on the fact that they built a camp in the mountains of Southeast Alaska where they shot a lot of this. It's not not all in a soundstage or whatever. They actually were out there McCarthy, Alaska or something doing this, which is really incredible. And having
it was Juneau.
Was it Juneau Icefield? I thought it was or it's on the British Columbia side of things too, but in any case, having worked quite a bit in the mountains of British Columbia with helicopters and all of this and drilling ice cores, it's an intense place to try to do anything. But yeah, I think that the physical representation of the station is still one of the most accurate portrayals in films. And I don't know what John Carpenter was modeling it on, but it does seem, it seems like he's modeling it on what a station was maybe 20 years before 1980, the early Navy stations, which were all men and did have more dogs involved and were, setting up stations in the middle of nowhere in Antarctica for the first time in, the late 50s and early 60s.
American Women, it was 1969 is when you had the first American Women.
Yeah.
Matt, are there spots that really speak to you on this film?
So I think it's hard to compliment acting in a John Carpenter movie, but like they did you're stuck in a camp. So they Winter Over started 2 weeks previous to this or whatever. And they captured that kind of, we've gotten over the being friendly part. And now we're just kind of doing our jobs, not talking much and just being annoyed with each other. Like the turn off the music thing near the beginning, classic, right? Like that's stuff I've lived through. They do, it's one of the better representations of just kind of that doldrums of a field camp.
Yeah.
Right. That it's not actually exciting to explore Antarctica. No offense, that it's boring for most of it.
Incredibly boring.
Yeah. Really tedious. It's like a whole lot of effort to get to one spot. And then you sit there and do tedious stuff with the same annoying people for 6 or 7 weeks. And that's unfair because one of the best parts of going to Antarctica are the relationships and the teams that you form in that crazy, deployment experience that as soon as you're done with your field season and everybody splinters off back to the normal world, you literally can't recreate that experience. It'll never happen again. And those 6 or 12 people are never going to be able to explain it to anybody else. So you can always pick up, the conversation or reminisce about what it was like the next time you bump into them, at a bar halfway across the world. Like it's a really unique bond, I suppose, is the word for it.
Oh, how good is the bond between Childs and MacReady going to be after they get home from this?
Are they going to get home?
No, they're not getting home. But
once again, scientists can't suspend their disbelief, right? So it starts with daylight winter. And then at the end, MacReady's like, it's going to get to -100. It's like, we just saw the sun out. The sun's going to come back out. This is not the depth of winter yet, dude. Like, you'll be fine for a little bit. It's going to suck, but you'll be fine.
How far north is your station? I mean, it's got to be pretty far north if it's that sunny.
So for me, something that really stuck out watching this movie this weekend is that it's actually just a really small cameo and it's early before I think right around the time that the helicopter's coming in with the Norwegians on it, is there's oddly a focus shot on a oil drum with chevron. And for me, that is very cool and in some ways very accurate because the amount of fuel, it takes to move anything around in Antarctica is a huge amount, first of all. But also BP, for example, was super involved in sponsoring Antarctic research. In Antarctica, there's a mobile gas bay because they gave money to an expedition. And just the supreme role that oil and fuel have kind of played in the science and exploration of Antarctica, which seems sort of contrary with our idea of, global warming and all of that. I find so when I saw that shot in there, I was like, oh yeah, and I thought. But
this isn't through altruism, though, is it? I mean, BP's looking for resources, right?
Yeah.
Early sponsorships of expeditions.
Yeah,
and it's all.
It was. I mean, BP spent a ton of money actually on they gave more money than New Zealand, the country, gave to the Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic Expedition, but they sent a seismologist, and they kept it kind of under wraps that they were looking for resources.
They mapped coal beds in Scott's expedition, right?
Well, I mean that's earlier though, but yeah.
I'm just saying it's always been around.
It's always been, yeah. And BP, I mean, I think part of it though, it's both practical, but you can't split too many hairs here. It's also sort of nationalistic and we want the name recognition of being, the first to fuel the first vehicle to get to the South Pole, that kind of thing as well,
who was Richard Byrd's fuel sponsor? I don't know that I know that. That'd be a great trivia question.
Was it Mobil Gas? That would be.
I can't remember, right? Because half of the features in West Antarctica are named after 20th century industrialists because of their sponsorship of Richard Byrd. But I think the fuel reference is a good one, Daniela, because it is like fuel is everything in Antarctica. Fuel is life and safety and warmth, and the plane coming to rescue you. And, so it's also fitting
even
that
science, right? There's rations on how much power different experiments can use, and if something takes away from something else.
Yeah, and if your generator stops running in the middle of a snowstorm, in the middle of an experiment, you're hosed. But I think also it fits with the fire, the role of fire throughout the film in life and death. Fire is life in Antarctica, but it also certainly is death in the thing.
Okay.
Right. Well, sorry, I keep interrupting. There's no water. Fire is actually super dangerous in Antarctica because despite there being all the ice, there is no water to put out the fire.
Right. It's a primary hazard as well, for sure.
So the fire at the end of the movie, I still don't understand. Like, this is the biggest plot hole to me.
Okay, go for it.
Scientist Matt here. So MacReady, the thing takes the generator or whatever. Mm-hmm. And MacReady is like, they're turning off the power. They want to go back into hibernation. Why wouldn't the alien just walk out the door? There's an entire continent, right? Like,
right.
You don't need to be in the station being warm, alien. You can just go outside, walk a mile, and bury yourself. What?
This is another suspension of disbelief problem, I think.
He's been asleep for 100,000 years. He's been awake for like a week.
He just wants
I feel like maybe he's just not thinking clearly at this point. They are not thinking. I don't want to genderize, the thing.
But like we do the same thing. Like if we have a multi-year project, we'll just leave stuff, right? It's the world's greatest freezer. So I have stashed like a box of food in the middle of West Antarctica for almost a decade. And then the project ends and I need to pull it out. But like, yeah, you can just leave it there, alien. Just go back to sleep. God.
I mean, well, maybe the idea is that, the alien could start building another ship again, right? Like, and he has to be on the station for that kind of stuff because they've destroyed all of his ships.
Okay.
Okay. I'm like ascribing way more than I'm sure John Carpenter.
We need John Carpenter on this podcast.
I know.
John Carpenter famously does not like to talk about this movie.
But he called into South Pole Station. He called into South Pole Station over the winter for their annual viewing party. Yeah, NSF pulling out the stops.
Okay, well, we tried to use a poster from the thing, a movie that's like super old in my book, and the book because we had a thing where we talked about films in Antarctica and watching films in Antarctica, but also films set there, et cetera. And they were going to charge like $400 for that image. And that was like a substantial portion of our image budget. That was like 10% of our image budget. And we were like, no, thank you. We found something for free. But so they're still making money off this movie.
It's been a slow burn, this movie. It's 40 years old now. It's 42 years old. But you talk about this movie now, people just lose their minds because they love I tweeted about this the other night. People just started texting me nonstop about this movie, how much they love it. We see Chariots of the Gods brought up in this film. And there's all this discourse I'm starting to see now on social media. There's civilizations that have found themselves in Antarctica. Do you guys find yourselves debunking mythology about Antarctica at all?
Yes.
I won't do it anymore.
Really?
People go. This is actually. I'll tell you why I stopped doing this.
Okay.
So like you go onto Google Earth, right, and you zoom in, and there's like a little image artifact that's a square, and that's just a processing artifact. And then your conspiracy theorist is like, that's the pyramid. I found the pyramid. That's where the Nazis still are. We get emails like that all the time. And so a Google rep, when I was a PhD student, was like presenting on something, and I was like, hey, why is Antarctica so bad in Google Earth? And they were like, oh, we just don't care.
There's no money to be made there.
And I was like, do you want me to fix it for you? And they were like, no, we just don't care. And this was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now. So, maybe they care now. But like, as soon as Google was like, we're not going to do anything to tamp down on these conspiracy theories, I was like, I'm out. I'm not even going to bother.
Yeah.
So for me, the conspiracy theory I get the most, I've had cab drivers ask me this. It's not the Nazi stuff, actually. It's It's the Piri Reis map. It's the sort of Oriental Islamic knowledge that clearly knew about Antarctica before the rest of the. I have actually a print of the Piri Reis map on my wall in my home.
Never heard about this.
So it's an Ottoman, like 16th century map that has the coast of South America on it, but also it has some territory that like could be just the bottom of South America, but it also could be Antarctica because it's at the sort of bottom of the world. And it's this whole, like, everyone fixates on this map, even though I already told you all, it's like a really common early modern map making trope for there to be land at the bottom of the earth. But people like just don't believe me and are like, no, but they must have known. Like, there must have been this, I've seen Chinese maps with it. I've seen like tons of European maps, but people fixate on this specific map. It's on Reddit. Like sometimes you'll see it on Reddit, or I see it on like those cool Antarctica type sites about like, how someone must have discovered it and just like hidden knowledge from the East for all of those years. That's a really random conspiracy, but it's one that bothers me a lot.
I have the opposite peeve now is people leaving Antarctica off of world maps. Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
They do it to New Zealand too, but nobody cares.
It Google leaving off New Zealand?
I get a lot of conspiracy theories because I interact with folks on social media, and it's a mix. I mean, it often comes back to the thing, but also, I guess, flat Earth stuff, ice wall, ice dome stuff. Yeah. I had to delete a video in one of the recent posts I made, which was like fantastic sundogs, all the halos and arcs and things you get around the sun when you're in blowing snow. And it was just going viral in all of the wrong places. So I deleted it. And because it's like inability to think deeply and critically about things is troubling, or to just like Google stuff.
The thing I don't understand is why I don't get more of the thing conspiracies. I guess you do, Peter. I've never gotten one of these, even though that's like the heart of my research is drilling through the Antarctic ice sheet to access what's at the bed. And like, we're driven by the microbiology exploration of this very unique ecosystem. And no one has been like, well, aren't you releasing crazy
You need to get
whatever
you need to get subglacial sediments more online. You need to be more.
No, let's not. If this podcast starts getting me these emails, I'm really upset. Jason, I'm forwarding them all to you.
We get more questions now about having started or starting new pandemics with viruses coming out of the ice.
We've accessed 2 subglacial lakes in the history of humanity. The last time we accessed a subglacial lake was December, January 2018, 2019.
Do you know Tristy Majors?
Yeah, I've known her for 15 years.
Oh, I've known her I don't really know her. I met her at a conference like 10 years ago.
We're 2 of the few people who were at both sites the 2 times we've accessed subglacial lakes. But like, yeah, the fact that no one is like, didn't you start COVID? Is remarkable. We didn't start COVID, for the record, but I would assume a conspiracy
Fletcher, if you could go ahead and add it out, that's thing saying he did not start COVID. We need
swear to fucking God, if you start these conspiracy theories,
we need the clicks here on the pod. Let's go. Fact,
congressional investigation.
That pyramid, pyramid alien versus predator, absolutely.
Can I say something that's not really a conspiracy theory, but as a historian is something that really drives a lot of my work, is the perception that Antarctica is this far off place that's totally disconnected from the rest of history. So speaking of Google, if you do a Google Images search for world map, because I've done this many times as like a teaching device or whatever, I was applying for jobs and stuff, many of the maps that come up don't have Antarctica. They'll have the like little tiny strip at the bottom. And like for me, I actually think that that's really harmful as a historian. Of course, I'm going to say that because it suggests that Antarctica is not a place where history happens because it's like we've set aside Antarctica as for scientists. Ergo, there are no politics there. There is no history there. All of the issues that like impact the rest of the world and vice versa. The ways that like I think it's easier for people to imagine of Antarctica as this far off wilderness that doesn't matter because we continue to perpetuate, and scientists do this too, no offense, that it's this place disconnected from history and disconnected from social structures.
I totally know senior scientists who would definitely have a battle with you right now, because they do think that it's separate from all of the things.
I mean, even the BBC 15 years ago did or less than that, did a special on Antarctic history, and it was literally just on Antarctic history. It wasn't on science, and their three guests were three Antarctic scientists, right? Even though there were historians or geographers, Klaus Dodds is a very prominent geographer that has published a lot on Antarctica. So for me, that's not really a conspiracy theory, because it's also being perpetuated by a lot of scientists and sort of leaders that Antarctica is this place where there is no history and there are no politics and everything's separate. And we're seeing the fruits of that with things like all the sexual harassment scandals that have been coming out recently, or, I can, a lot of the publications I have done have been to try and talk about ways that, politics continue to impact, Antarctic systems and stuff. So how imperialism, Cold War politics, geopolitics, strategic gender relations, race relations, all of that. And I think it's not so much a conspiracy theory, but a misconception that Antarctica is this place that is absent of history, human history.
Yeah, I think the dirty secret is that as we
extraction.
As graduate students, as we're potentially becoming Antarctic scientists, there is no place to formally get this sort of background on how we came to have a U.S. Antarctic program and invest $300 and $400 million a year in our operations down there. It's all it feeds into having literally senior scientists who still just sort of enjoy what we have, but don't realize that we have a really serious role to play in making sure that we continue to have it. It stresses me out daily. But I think of there are people on the record talking about this, how geopolitics feeds into their success and having resources for science in Antarctica. I mean, the most prominent ice core scientist in the UK is on the record in their national archives saying that he wouldn't have had an ice core research career if it weren't for the Falkland War and the increase in funding for the British Antarctic Survey following that conflict. It's really patently obvious, but you have to go looking for it yourself to find that. And actually, one of my things to do in my new role, I'm newly a teaching professor in addition to a researcher at the university, is to design some courses about this stuff and find colleagues in the right places, like Daniella, unfortunately, who's not at my institution, but is a Twitter friend.
Zoom is great.
RIP right? Twitter. Yes, I know we should connect more often, but it's something that geoscientists need to be a little bit more humble about reaching out and learning from the other disciplines and people who know more about the undertones of all this stuff than we do.
Guys, we talk about this film comes out in 1982. We're now 42 years later. How's global warming changing Antarctica? What's going on here?
Yeah, Matt and I have a lot of fun opinions about this, because it's really actually a super complicated answer to tell you what is going on in Antarctica with respect to global warming. There are really concerning changes in West Antarctica that Matt and I think about. Thwaites Glacier, the Doomsday Glacier, annoying name for that, but really consequential glacier the size of Florida that is changing fast, but is likely changing due to normal natural processes, and it's just at an unlucky time, and it will continue as human-caused warming of the atmosphere and of the ocean starts to arrive in the next few decades. Really, and we're challenged down there. This is the motivation for my career. So you give me a perfect pitch here. We don't have modern climate records for most of Antarctica, right? We have say a dozen weather records from stations that go back to 1957. And so that's where we come in, and we go to places and drill just shallow ice cores to capture recent decades or a couple hundred years to try to see, okay, what's the normal noise of climate? Antarctica's atmospheric climate is the noisiest climate on the planet. It's hugely variable year to year. And we can't, in a noisy system with short and sparsely spaced records, statistically, you can't document the emergence of a trend without better, more longer data sets. And so that's what we are sort of hammering on. But the warming that we are seeing on average, the rest of the globe is slowly creeping onto the Antarctic continent. The structure of the Antarctic continent also actually sort of keeps a lot of the atmospheric change out. It slows it down. It's like a giant pancake with really steep edges that are 1,000 to 2,000 meters high. And that actually physically keeps a lot of the warming from otherwise progressing more quickly inland. But yeah, Matt, I'm sure, has his answer as well.
Yeah, no, that was a pretty good answer, Peter. I have not much to add. I think one of the best facts I've read recently is that there are as many automatic weather stations across Antarctica, which, as Peter said earlier, is 1.5 times the size of the lower 48. So lower 48 plus Mexico, that's about the size of Antarctica. There's many automatic weather stations across that entire area as there are in just the Paris region for weather prediction. I mean, like, we are so behind in just this kind of baseline data collection. And a lot of Peter's work is trying to use proxy information from the ice sheet itself to understand what these changes have looked like in high resolution over recent timescales. But we just don't have this baseline. And again, these interannual variations are so big that it's really hard to get a signal through all of that noise. And so these are the things we argue about at scientific conferences still. It's really hard to fingerprint what is actually anthropogenic, human-driven in Antarctica, and what is just, this is a crazy continent with crazy extremes.
I gave a talk at the about the history stuff that I've worked on when I was doing a research fellowship at the University of Canterbury, and but it was to a room of scientists, of course, because it was at Gateway Antarctica, and they were my gracious hosts. But it meant that I had someone come up to me and object afterwards to my use of global warming in Antarctica, because he was like, well, actually, and had all of these like really hyper specific things, which was really interesting to me. But it's the kind of thing that I can't talk to my students about, because then they'd be like, so global warming is not really real,
It's a challenge.
So even bigger picture, since I taught this week in a graduate level class, Antarctica is really, really cold. Right? The average surface temperature in Antarctica is about -40 degrees. And that's very different than the climate in, say, the northern hemisphere, where you're much closer to the freezing point, even if you're on an ice sheet. And so if you increase the temperature a little bit in Antarctica on average, what's actually going to happen is you're not going to start melting it, because you're still way the hell below zero, but you're going to snow a lot more, right? The air is warmer, it can hold more moisture. And so we actually expect that there's going to be this growth period in particularly East Antarctica, because it will start dumping more and more and more snow as you start cranking the atmospheric temperature a little bit. And I'm not saying that the atmospheric temperature is being cranked, but if this were to happen in East Antarctica, we actually expect as scientists that the East Antarctic continent should expand.
Yeah, and it's starting to happen in really extreme ways. Like over 2 or 3 days in March 2022, there was a huge storm that penetrated into East Antarctica, probably the most significant heat wave ever observed on the planet, like 40 degrees Celsius anomalies or something insane. And at the same time, it was one of the biggest dumps of snow, of mass, of what would otherwise be ice flowing into the ocean onto the ice sheet. So, these really hugely complex systems. And, that's what gets me about Antarctica. It's like every scale matters, and every time scale, like spatially and temporally, all of the scales matter. Tiny processes, like what's going on, how rough is the bedrock underneath the Antarctic ice sheet, and do tides matter, in how calving of icebergs happen in Antarctica. And we're trying to bring all of these things together to then ultimately, right, the ultimate goal is to project the likely future of the Antarctic ice sheet, mostly with respect to sea level rise. And that's a super tricky problem that involves really detailed budget keeping of all of these processes and all of these different timescales. And everybody needs to cooperate to do it and have the resources. And, it's a big challenge. We're lucky we do have big assets like satellites from NASA and the European Space Agency, but
I'll insert some glaciology 101 for Jason's sake. So when we're thinking about the Antarctic ice sheet, or any glacier, to be honest, is we think about it in this budgeting system where we think about the inputs, which in Antarctica is snowfall, And we think about the outputs. So how many icebergs are being formed every year? How much ice is flowing off of the continent and into the ocean? And any discrepancy in that budget either causes the ice sheet to grow if you have a positive mass budget, or it causes the ice sheet to contribute to sea level rise, a negative mass balance. And so just to give you a scale here, every year, the amount of snowfall across Antarctica is equivalent to taking 8 millimeters off of the global ocean. That is how much snow today falls in 2024. 8 millimeters off of the entire global ocean will fall in Antarctica. And that's balanced by ice flowing out across and back into the ocean. And so these are huge volumes and masses of water and snow and ice that we're talking about. And so you can imagine if you don't have these numbers nailed down really, really well, you're going to screw up this budget really quickly. And so small changes, right? You increase snowfall by 10%. Well, that's almost an entire millimeter of sea level equivalent that we're talking about. Wow, we need these error bars to be really small.
So I actually have a question for, can I ask a question based on what
Go ahead.
you were saying? So first I'll start it with just a brief anecdote about the first time I went to a SCAR conference in 2014. I went to UC Irvine for my PhD, and your badge doesn't say what your department you're in, it just says what university. And so I kept having people come up to me being like, "Oh, you're one of Eric's students," and both Eric Saltzman, who's a prominent paleoclimatologist, and who I've actually gone on a tour of his lab, and Eric Regnault, who I've met a bunch of times, who's a very prominent glaciologist, are professors at UCI. And so everyone was looking at me with real respect the whole time at the SCAR conference, because they all thought I was one of these, the students of these very famous and established paleoclimatologists, glaciologists. But speaking of, because I know Eric Regnault has done some of the work with NASA on the sort of ice plains and stuff. And you mentioned this will let me take it back to the movie, the way that Antarctica is understood both in media, but also by many scientists, engineers, as this analogous space for space. It's this for outer space. It is this, even with the governance, right? We talked about the Antarctic and the Outer Space Treaty at the beginning. The way that Antarctica is often perceived as an analog for outer space. I actually have some pretty strong opinions on why it shouldn't be, even though it clearly is. And the Thing is a good example of that, of literally an alien settling in Antarctica. But I wondered if you guys had any thoughts about the ways that Antarctica is often framed as this analogy for outer space, as this other world. It's always described as otherworldly, right?
I think we talk about this analogy a lot because a lot of us actually straddle the planetary science, earth science boundary. And so it's a convenient analog for us. And more than anything, it's so we talk about the subglacial environment as an analog for where we might find extraterrestrial life. I think it's a terrible analogy because actually the subglacial environment's a pretty easy place to live for a microbe. It's close to the freezing point. It's 0 degrees Celsius. There's a lot of water and there's a lot of sediment. There's no light, but we know bugs can survive without light, but microbes, not real bugs. And so it's not really a great analog in the physical sense. But in terms of the access, the difficulty of operations, I think that's where we get a little closer to a pretty good analog. So if you go to Europa and you want to access the subsurface ocean, great for me to talk about right now because Europa Clipper is launching tomorrow, hopefully. And you need to be able to operate autonomously in a place where you need to get through an ice shell that's of the thickness of Antarctica. And thicker, but Antarctica is a good start for that. And so there are some, I think, good analogs. I think we overuse it and we oversell it a lot, but I wouldn't totally throw the planetary analog in the trash quite yet.
I will support the analogy only in the sort of human and societal infrastructure category, right? So we're so incredibly privileged to be able to get out to these far-flung parts of Antarctica arguably in pursuit of just like basic science and discovery. That's a sort of pretty similar motivation for space, access to space, learning how to operate in space. But we also do it on, as the sharp end of this huge human pyramid of all of the people and the physical infrastructure that we need, the expertise that we need to, operate everything from a station to aircraft to icebreakers to, the bureaucracy that links all those things together. And I would say that most importantly, and like pretty front of mind these days, is the base underneath that pyramid is peace and democracy, and agreeing as a society to fund space research and any type of research worldwide. And if we don't have that, like, we're making big assumptions that we're going to always continue to have that. And I don't think we're putting in enough work on that, in this society that seems to me to have been sort of coasting on a lot of what we set up in the post-World War II era and a lot of the constructs of the Cold War. And we're not really acknowledging the complexity of the post-Cold War period, but that's where I'm getting a little bit outside of my expertise. But it's stressing me out a lot these days. We are assuming we're going to have a lot of these norms and this stability that I don't know is guaranteed, because we're not addressing a lot of the realities of the super complex global world that we occupy.
So, I mean, the reason I have such a hard, I understand this analogy. I have a book chapter coming out that I'm addressing it, and it's a historical one too. Both Antarctica and space are these kind of like frontiers for the Cold War era. You have NASA and the USAP getting set up right around the same time. You have a lot of people talk about the extremity or whatever, but I think that this otherworldly thing not only contributes to this idea that Antarctica is not a place for people, right, or a place where people are, but I think that it really ignores the fact that Antarctica is nothing like space, right? In the sense that Antarctica has oxygen, Antarctica has a lot of fauna, especially in a lot of the areas that people are doing this sort of analog research is in like the McMurdo Dry Valleys, or where there actually are lots of animal, or nearby, right? There are. I was doing some research on an early trove, remote. What was it? A teleremote vehicle that was tested in the early 90s, and it's like they were testing it at a lake in the Dry Valleys, but also in the water by McMurdo, right? So where there are animals and stuff. And I don't know, I feel like in this era that where we're trying to promote people protecting Earth, thinking about Antarctica isn't another world. It's our world, right? It's 7% of our land and all of the water, and regulating our climate and everything. And I don't know, I feel like it's almost harmful, even though people have been doing it since Lovecraft wrote a short story in 1905 about how if we go to the moon, we'll be able to better map Antarctica. It is a long-standing trope of this comparing Antarctica and space, but I think it's kind of a harmful one. It's fun, maybe, but...
Guys, you're all teaching in various capacities on Antarctica. If people are listening in this now and want to read the science behind Antarctica or the history behind it, what do you like?
For science, I would start with 2 Mile Time Machine, probably. It's a little bit older now. It was written by Richard Alley. And it's just a great introduction. It was based on a PBS special he did originally, I think.
Are you talking about Earth? Right? Are you talking about Earth, the Operator's Manual, or?
Yes, I'm getting confused about all the things Richard Alley has done.
Yeah, the Time Machine one's about the Greenland ice drilling project, but that's all right.
Yeah, Earth, the Operator's Manual probably is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, it's not Antarctic specific, but I mean, I thought of a great introductory one of a lot of the human elements of Antarctica is a book called Hoosh, which is a name for an Antarctic, an Antarctic stew, terrible stuff.
Yeah, it's supposed to be pemmican and hardtack turned into a stew.
Yeah, dating back to the explorers, but it's a nice sampler of vignettes of life in Antarctica that are structured around food, because it was the guy was a chef or something, but he worked through the U.S. Antarctic program. I could get super deep into really nerdy ones about Antarctica. I think more people should actually read, the biography of Richard Byrd, who is the person that we owe the modern era of science and peace in Antarctica to. And
you mean Rose's book, University of Missouri Press?
Yeah, Rose has done a lot.
Yeah,
a lot of I think probably the best biographer. I think because it just sort of frames, like, Byrd accomplished a lot of amazing things, but he also was incredibly privileged, and it's that privileged access that
First
he had.
Families.
Yeah, basically, if you had access to FDR in the early mid 20th century, you could start federal agencies at the stroke of a pen. You could, get the U.S. government to support an Antarctic expedition for the first time. And, from all of that, then after World War II, you could get the first gigantic U.S. Navy expedition to take 4,000, 5,000 enlisted men down to Antarctica with an aircraft carrier. The first way we got DC-3s into Antarctica, which we still fly, which are flying today to Antarctica, they flew them off of an aircraft carrier with jet rockets strapped to the side. And Richard Byrd was on the first one. It's incredible what that guy set in place, and he's an incredibly flawed character. I don't idolize him in any way as a leader. I suppose I probably do idolize him in other ways, just for the legacy that he set in place. But it's fantastic, and I do get a lot of conspiracy theories that tie back to Richard Byrd. For some reason, it's like him and the Nazis and disputed first flights over the North Pole,
the UFOs. The UFOs, that's a high jump, isn't it?
Yeah. Military operations. I guess that ties me back to the most consistent.
Well, I just mean the conspiracy. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's government control of access to Antarctica. Actually, is the biggest one I probably get. And if you work with the federal government, how everything is just bootstrapped together, and there's no way that we could cover up any conspiracy of any real size, much less the size of a continent or the globe with respect to global warming. But
so I thought we were talking about science books, exploration books. Every single person, it doesn't matter what we say, every single person, their entry into this world will be endurance.
By Alfred Lansing.
Yes, and that's the story of Ernest Shackleton's expedition where the boat sinks and blah, blah, blah. If I teach the world anything right now, in this moment, if you read Endurance, please read The Lost Men by Kelly Tyler Lewis. Is that her name? It is about Shackleton's party on the other side of the continent. And so, the story is Shackleton, no one died. He's this great hero. No, he killed a whole bunch of people on the other side of the continent.
Well, three.
Through irresponsibility. He made a bunch of bad leadership decisions and was not prepared. And a bunch of people died because of it. And so, please, if you read Endurance, read The Lost Men.
Not a great example of leadership.
I mean, besides, of course, my own book, I would say people one thing I talk about as a historian, the thing I love about doing research about Antarctica is that everyone, we talk about how hard it is to get access to primary sources sometimes, right? Basically, everyone who went to Antarctica before and maybe even sometimes after 1980 wrote a book about it. It is a continent that somebody described as being created by writing. So there are so many really, really good memoirs, some really bad ones, but some really good examples of like classics and what we'd call now adventure writing or travel writing. The Worst Journey in the World is like a very classic one by absolutely Cherry Gerard. Byrd has 3 or 4, but Alone is kind of a classic, which is very much this man versus wilderness and man versus his own mind.
Another example of really bad leadership also.
Yeah,
right. Well, sure, but
leave your whole crew by themselves while you go almost kill yourself in a little hut because you don't know how to operate a generator.
But I mean, Edmund Hillary, No Latitude for Error is pretty good. It's exciting anyway, compared to the kind of official So after the Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic Expedition, there's like an official book written by Hilary and Vivian Fuchs, who is the leader of that expedition, called The Crossing of Antarctica. That's not particularly good. I mean, it sold well because of the circumstances in which it came out. And like immediately after, Hilary wrote a tell-all memoir where he basically called the British a bunch of pussies for not like being as good and manly as the New Zealanders in Antarctica, which is was a huge scandal at the time. So that's another good one. I think you could still get, I would say, read one of the memoirs of these people who actually go, because that's very interesting to me as a historian.
I have a niche one. Oh, sorry, Matt.
I was going to ask, what's everyone's favorite niche Antarctic exploration book?
Okay. Mine is Penguins Have Square Eyes, which was written by I think CBS News correspondent that went with some of the first air crews to Antarctica, the U.S. Navy air crews, and traveled with them, across the Pacific Ocean to New Zealand, had a grand old time partying it up in Christchurch, and then watched as some of these air crews made their first flights, and some of the flights were not successful and crashed on arrival, and people passed away. So I actually haven't finished reading it because I actually have sort of a personal connection to a family member of a crew member on that flight, and I actually didn't realize it was a part of the book. But it's a really interesting first person perspective of that, like literally, like really the U.S. Navy and the U.S. military, launching what they literally called an assault on Antarctica. And it's quite fascinating to have it from a sort of naive American, who's never been in that sort of situation and is buddy with these Navy guys. And it's all guys, of course. So it's, anyway, you'll have to find it on eBay. I bought a copy, so it's probably getting more and more expensive to find. But
so my favorite niche book, and it's unclear whether I really loved it just because I'm a glaciologist and this was the expedition that kind of launched modern science in Antarctica, but Foothold on Antarctica. It's by Charles Swithenbank, who's like a glaciologist who was around when I was doing glaciology. He passed away about 10 years ago now. But he was on the Norwegian, British, Swedish Antarctic expedition, which was the first post-war expedition. And there's so much like extraordinarily basic science that came out of that expedition, as well as like completely nuts stories. But like there's this guy, Walter Schitt, like we use his equations he came up with all the time in Peter's world. Gordon Robin basically did all the original math for how glaciers work, like how tides impact the flexure of an ice shelf, things like that. But there are also these crazy stories, like there was a guy who drove off the front of an ice shelf and died. Now, I knew of his ice shelf. I read this book, and like now I understand who he was and what happened. There's another guy on the expedition who got a rock shard in his eye, and they had to take the eyeball out, like while they're in the middle of Antarctica. And then they got a ship to resupply, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to take you home because you lost your eye." And he's like, No, I'm staying through the end of this. Like completely insane stuff. And one of the like fascinating parts of this, back to the geopolitics, is one of the reasons this was a successful expedition was because as the Allies were going through Europe, like they're going into all of these Nazi scientists' offices, and someone just grabbed all the notes from the Nazi expeditions to Antarctica. It was just like they were burning most things. They just took it. They're like, this might be useful. And it ended up on some guy's desk, and they're like, this is where we're going to go. And so like that provided the backbone for a lot of the science that we're doing today, which is nuts.
And arguably, that's the first international expedition as well. And so that involves, major players from multiple countries coming together. Swithenbank has a book called Vodka on Ice, where he talks about his time. And there's an American who also did this, and he wrote one called Antarctic Comrades right around the same time, about being on a Russian station as part of exchanges during the Cold War. And the American guy, whose name I'm blanking on right now, was there during the U-2 incident, which is pretty cool. But the official account of the expedition that Matt was talking about is called The White Desert, written by the expedition leader. And one thing that's sort of fun is he talks about them making cocktails from like ice that's like from when Napoleon was like at Waterloo, and them like consciously kind of doing that and thinking about archives as historical records, right?
That's the apocryphal beginning of analysis of gases trapped in ice cores from the French. But you know the name of another Swithenbank memoir is An Alien in Antarctica.
Oh, yes.
You set it all up.
That fits.
I might have to peel off here in the next few minutes, guys. I got a family camping trip.
Yeah, I want to bring you guys back to maybe the final question here. Actually, no. We're coming up here on the last one.
We're talking about Big Trouble in Little China, right? That was the whole point of this.
Yeah, we're just now getting to that, which is this pod is actually kind of famous, Matt, for talking about the film for about 16 seconds.
Got it.
So we end up with Childs and MacReady by the fire at the end of the film. Who's the alien?
That's such a hard question.
I don't think it's the point, really.
Right. I mean,
it doesn't matter.
That's where we get to that this is a movie set in the Cold War, right? That, it's mutually assured destruction, right? If one, it doesn't matter who is or isn't the sort of bad guy here. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe Childs, because he goes off on his own for a bit, right? Like that's sort of suspicious.
The wild thing is, right, like John Carpenter has an answer to this. Like I'm pretty sure he
refuses to answer. Says he'll take it to his grave.
Yeah.
Says he will. I don't think he should. I don't want to know.
They shot multiple endings. They, I think this is even on Wikipedia. They shot the happy ending. They shot this ending, and I think they shot a third. This was the original ending, and it performed terribly to the audiences. And so they went to the happy ending, and then they were like, we can't do that. That's not faithful to like the weirdness of this movie. And they went back to this ending. Which I find really interesting, and like it's the anti-hero, that it's all about the nihilism here, right?
I mean, the open question is, I think, part of the point. It's why it's like a good movie. It's like why people like, the end of, I don't know, you guys are all around my age, The Giver, when we used to like that because we don't know what happens at the end, right? Like, But can I say my weird Antarctica book really fast? It's called The Ice by Stephen Pine. And the reason I'm saying that as a weird one, because Jason will appreciate this, Stephen Pine wrote this book as one of the first writers of the Antarctic Writers and Artists Program, which is a federal program to fund artists and writers to go to Antarctica. And Pine had nothing to do with Antarctica. He was actually famous for being a fire historian. He's written like tons of books on the history of fire. But he wrote this really... It's ironic because no one knows of him as a scholar of Antarctica, but for those who write about the history of Antarctica, it's like a foundational text. It's like the first text that like anyone ever read. It's from 1985. That was like a serious historical analytical study of Antarctic science and stuff. And it was randomly this fire historian who's very famous. Matt and Peter, if you're environmental history, like Stephen Pine is extremely famous as a historian.
All right. Well, speaking of fire, Peter, you're going off to go camping where there will be fires. I work for the Forest Service, which is definitely not sponsoring this podcast. But where can people find you guys outside of this podcast? Are you on Twitter? Are you on Blue Sky? Have you made the move to Blue Sky? Where are you guys?
I'm still mourning the loss of science Twitter. I'm on it, but not actively using it. I'm
for history.
So, I'm Icy Pete across all the socials, but Instagram, I guess I use probably most these days. TikTok I do use. I've taken a bit of a break, but I have unfortunately a very large following on TikTok. But I don't have an interactive social media space these days. It's really lame because it's how I know Daniella is from science Twitter.
It happened to history Twitter too, man. It's like there's like a legitimate mourning. Daniella, where are you?
I'm still on Twitter, and I'm also on Blue Sky.
Matt?
I guess you can find me on Twitter at Minds Glaciology. That's my lab's very infrequently posted social media account. We also have an infrequently posted Instagram account as well. I'm personally on Blue Sky. I mostly just downloaded it to see my friend who went viral for quitting his job from a Blue Sky post. So... yeah,
we'll all be so lucky.
I don't, not much social media in my life right now.
Good for you.
Yeah, good for you.
Good. So
For work.
Guys, thank you so much for being here. I was so excited to do this. I wanted to line this up. Daniela and I had been talking about this forever. So guys, thanks so much for taking the time and doing this. This was a blast. We're going to do the watch party on this as well the same week here in a couple of weeks. So hopefully people will dig it. So
Cool.
Thanks for being here.
So log on to Blue Sky on those days.
Please invite me back for 8 Below.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you so very much to our guests, Matthew Siegfried, Peter Neff, and Daniella McCahey. Thank you, of course, to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for making this show go. And of course, thank you to all of you for continuing to come in and share and listen to HATM. If you want to continue to help support the pod, please continue to share on social media, send it to a friend, and leave us some comments on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Guys, I hope you had a blast listening to this podcast. It was a lot of fun recording it. We've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up for you here in the fall and as we head into winter, so sit back and relax. We've got more coming. But for now, we'll see you a little bit later. Ciao for now. Bye.